One of the most surprising formulas on my color mixing chart is when you combine quinacridone magenta with a transparent yellow. Believe it or not, it makes red, even though you've always been told you can't mix it. Magenta is not a version of red, it's like a hot pink. And if you add small amounts of a transparent yellow to it, it starts to turn red. It's not an equal mixture, it's more magenta than it is yellow. So that's a pretty decent red. It might not be as vivid as like cadmium red, but that's pretty close. Pyrrole red is probably the most vivid red that I have. It's a little bit more saturated, but this makes a decent red. And the cool thing is, it's transparent. Cadmium red is opaque, so it's good to have a transparent red, which works good for glazing. Another fun mixture is mixing black with yellow, which creates a nice natural olive green. And that works well anytime you need a natural looking green for landscape painting. And I'll use this benzimidazoline yellow and add a little bit of black to it. So normally you think that black only darkens colors or makes them duller, but you can actually mix a green from yellow this way. You can add in more yellow to make lighter versions of it too. That will give you more variety in your landscape paintings. Sometimes people struggle when mixing pink. When you mix it from red, it creates a warmer pink. It's kind of like a salmon pink. But if you need a cooler pink for something like a rose, quinacridone magenta works better. So here's some quinacridone magenta. And can you see how much cooler that is? And it's also more saturated. I can add a little bit more. You would never be able to achieve this color by using red. And that's where people struggle with mixing pink. I can add more red to this, but it still won't make that color. All these formulas are hiding in plain sight on my acrylic color mixing chart. So here's the formula for mixing red, and here's the one where black and yellow makes green. And down here at the bottom, I compare both pinks. There's a structure to this chart. All of these are different versions of how to mix orange. So I'll give a quick demonstration on the different ways of mixing orange. The most vivid orange would be cadmium orange. I'll mix some of this benzimidazoline yellow with the pyrrole red. That makes orange, and I'll compare it to the cadmium orange. Need a little bit more of this yellow. This is the cadmium orange, and I'll compare that to the orange that I mixed. Maybe it's a little bit lighter. They look pretty similar on the screen, but in person, this is definitely one step less saturated. Most of the time it doesn't matter, only when you need the most vivid orange would you need something like cadmium orange. I do have a formula for mixing orange that uses cadmium red on the chart, but I found that this version of cadmium red light from Golden makes a pretty decent orange. It's pretty close to the cadmium orange. You can tell from the tube it's a little bit more of an orangey red than the pyrrole red. So this does seem a little bit more vibrant. Needs a little more yellow. So that's pretty close. I can compare it to the two other samples. So it is a little bit more vivid than the other mixture. And it's pretty close to the cadmium orange from the tube. It's just a hair bit less saturated. I can also take this mixed red and add some yellow to it, and that will make an orange too. It's not as vibrant as the one I just mixed or the cadmium orange, but it does work. Need a little bit more yellow. And there's what that orange looks like. I show that on the chart. Here's the red, and then here's the orange that I mixed from it. The only one I didn't demonstrate is the alizarin crimson, which makes an even duller orange. The next grouping is all the different greens you can mix, and it continues up over on this middle section. But the basic concept is the ultramarine blue will make a duller green. If you use phthalo blue or phthalo green, it makes a much more vivid green. Another thing you have to consider is how much orange is in your yellow. In these two, these are pretty pure yellows. But in this example with the Hansa yellow medium, it's more orange. And what that does is it makes the green a little bit less saturated. You can see that more in this example where I use the cadmium-free orange and mix it with the green, and it turns out much duller. So what you need to keep in your mind is that if you need a dull green, you need to add some warm color into it. And that could be orange or red or magenta. And that yields a green that's like that. As I demonstrated in the beginning, the other shortcut is to mix yellow and black. Here are phthalo blue and ultramarine blue. And I'll use both of these to mix green, and then we'll compare them. So first up, I'll mix the phthalo blue with the yellow. And I already made a mistake. You need more yellow than you need the blue. So this combination makes a pretty vivid green. And you can add more yellow to it to create a larger variety of greens. Now if I take the same yellow and add ultramarine blue to it, it makes a much duller green. So here it is with more blue, and that's like the darker version of this color. You can see this looks more natural. It would probably work good in a landscape painting. I would use the phthalo blue when I need a more intense green. And phthalo green makes the most vivid green. It's pretty dark straight from the tube, but when I add yellow to it, you'll see how intense this is. If you ever use light green permanent, this is what it's made from. I demonstrated how to mix this in my video about how to mix green. So that is more intense. Phthalo green is also what's needed to mix turquoise, and that's on my color mixing chart. You just add white to it, and you get a turquoise color. You can adjust it by adding phthalo blue or yellow to it, but just adding white to it works pretty well. I'll show you how that works. That's the phthalo green, and I'll add a little bit of white to it. And that's a basic turquoise color. As I said, you could just pick up a little bit of yellow and tilt it more towards green, or you could take a touch of phthalo blue and make it more biased towards the blue. Purple also gives people trouble, and what you need to keep in mind is use quinacridone magenta. That will yield the most vivid purple. This looks dark on here because this is the mass tone, which is how a color looks in a thick layer. If I were to use this as a glaze or add white to it, it'd be much more vibrant. I recommend using ultramarine blue, but phthalo blue also works. The trap is when you try to use red to mix purple, it can create a purple, but it's duller. It's kind of like a grayish purple. I have a video where I took every red that I have and I mixed it with blue, and then I compared it to what it looks like when you use magenta. And the magenta creates a much more vibrant purple. So I'll go ahead and show you my favorite formula for purple. Here's ultramarine blue and quinacridone magenta. It starts turning violet, but when you add more, it turns purple. And like I said, this looks pretty dark, but when you spread it out thin, it's much more vibrant. I can add white to it, and that will give you a more pastel shade of purple. There are a ton of formulas for mixing brown. The main point is that brown is either a dark red or a dark orange. The easiest formula for mixing brown would be to mix red with black, and that will give you like a chocolate brown. I also like using ultramarine blue to mix brown. It works pretty much in the same way as the black does. And that's the thing about mixing purple, is that when you add a little bit of the ultramarine blue to the red, it starts to turn brownish. And when you add more blue, it turns purple, but it's a duller purple. Getting to a brown is easy, but getting a specific shade of brown is where it gets more difficult. If you need a more orangey brown, you can also use something like cadmium orange and mix a little bit of blue in there. Or you could just use one of these formulas and add more yellow in there. If you think about it, if you add yellow to it, it's kind of like starting off with orange, because yellow and red makes orange. I'll do a quick demonstration, and that should help you to understand how to mix brown. So this is the pyrrole red, and I'll add a little bit of the black to it. And that makes a brownish color, and the shade of brown depends on how much red you add to it. But you do get like a chocolate brown, and if you add a little bit more red, it's like a reddish brown. And as I said, you can get a similar result if you use ultramarine blue instead of the black. So that's pretty much the same thing. A warmer brown, you could just start with orange and add maybe a little bit of ultramarine blue. And that makes a lighter, more orange brown. You could also adjust these by adding orange into them. So there's a lot of variations you can mix with just a few colors. I have an entire video about how to mix brown. There's tons of formulas in there. You can download a PDF of my color mixing chart when you sign up for my free email newsletter. I also have it available as a print There's a link to it in the description below. I mixed every color in this chart by hand and photographed the results, so it reflects how pigments actually behave. Up next, you can watch my color theory playlist. I have dedicated videos on how to mix black, purple, red, pink, and green. Thanks for watching.